well, great. Good afternoon, colleagues and friends, and welcome to Lowell Community Health Center's inaugural celebration of Juneteenth. I'm so excited. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Sue Levine, and I am the Chief Executive Officer here at Lowell Community Health Center. And it's really a special day to celebrate Juneteenth. I'm looking out. I know Sachenda's going to do a pan out of the room, but we are joined today with several colleagues and friends right in this room at the health center, and it's just so wonderful to be with you and to be together again. We're also joined by many staff who are participating from their departments via Zoom in their workstations. And I'm so grateful to our friends and colleagues from across the community who are joining us also by Zoom and I believe Facebook Live to help us join in celebrating and honoring this very special holiday, Juneteenth. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists, very esteemed panelists. Each of these three individuals are very special and hold a very special place in the hearts of Lowell Community Health Center. They all have a wonderful connection to us, but they are also inspirational community leaders who I admire, and they are very dedicated to our community. And so I am so grateful to each of you for making the time to celebrate Juneteenth here with us at the Health Center. So I get the great privilege of introducing our panelists, who I know many of you know because they are great friends of all of us, of all of ours. So first I'd like to introduce Masada Jones, she, her, hers. Masada is an artist, community builder, and youth worker. She is founder and executive director of the Kindred Project, an organization creating visible community with Black people in Lowell. Masada has organized vigils, marches, and community meetings as a response to systemic injustice. She has made it her mission to work in prevention and to create spaces that do not center whiteness. Masada is a Lowell native dedicated to investing in her people and her community. Becoming Broken is her first full-length collection of poetry, which was released in March of 2016. Masada's special connection to our health center is she actually worked in our Team Block program. Team Block. I think that was back in 2012, I'm not sure. And she was with us for many years. And so she is forever a permanent member of the Lowell Community Health Center family. Also pleased to introduce you to Maritza Grooms. Maritza was born in Lowell, and no matter how far she goes, and I've heard this many times, she will always call Lowell home. She works full-time as the assistant director at Cambridge Community Television, helping to amplify marginalized voices, but spends much of her free time as a community educator with a focus on race relations in the US, Lowell's history, or both. You can catch her hosting History in Lowell with UMass Lowell Professor Robert Forrant. Who's that? On Lowell, I was going to say Lowell Telecommunications, Lowell Media.
Telemedia.
Lowell Telemedia. I know they've rebranded. Can't give me changes at the last minute. And Maritza is building community with the Kindred Project, or doing something creative with the Free Soil Arts Collective right here in Lowell. Over the years, Maritza has also held a special place in the hearts of Lowell Community Health Center. She has collaborated also with Team Block. And we were just reflecting that the last time I think she and I were in this room together, she was one of the leaders of our Team Block annual youth conference called Revolution. Yay. I got it. Okay, and to my right is the very esteemed Robert Forrant, a Lowell resident. He is a University of Massachusetts Lowell Distinguished Professor of History and Director of the department's graduate program. He is a board member of the Lawrence History Center, and he is co-author with Christoph Strobel of Ethnicity in Lowell, an Immigration History of that City, completed for the Lowell National Historic Park, and The Big Move, Immigrant Voices from a Mill City in 2021. Along with Maritza, Grooms, he hosts the long-running History in Lowell program on Lowell Telemedia, which, by the way, serious plug, please make sure to watch their show, History in Lowell. As I Facebook message them, it is like butter. The two of them, and I just asked them earlier today if they edit or rehearse. No edits. They get in a room, they have a conversation about history and its implications in present day, and it is the most powerful thing I have seen in a long time, and I will now watch all of them. So it's beautiful. There's my plug. Okay, so Bob too will be forever linked with our health center. He had the arduous duty of helping us to recreate or bring alive our 50-year history. In 2020 was the 50th anniversary of Lowell Community Health Center, and he partnered with us to bring our history alive on our beautiful timeline, which is located on the first floor of the health center. So thank you, Bob, for doing that. Thank you, Bob, Masada, Maritza, for sharing your time with us today. We're really excited to be honoring this holiday, particularly with the three of you and all of you. So with that, I'll turn it over to.
I'm going to say team block and see what happens. We would like to, on the panel, thank Lowell Telemedia for helping with getting everything working, the technology, and everything related to this morning. Also, Suchanda Uch for making us look pretty. You brought me a plant. So that's really good. And Christina Rondo for making sure the Facebook Live and all that other stuff works as well. So we're in good hands. If you don't know, the university, UMass Lowell's computer system has been hijacked. So whenever the tech works, I'm always grateful and thoroughly happy that that's the case. And it's interesting to be here. I just want to preface a little bit. I'm going to ask people a bunch of questions for the time that we have. That Massachusetts, which we sometimes think of, a lot of us who've lived in Massachusetts sometimes think of Massachusetts as this very liberal state. When in fact, Massachusetts history, when it comes to race, when it comes to segregated school systems, when it comes to being the last baseball team in the major leagues to integrate and have an African-American baseball player, the Red Sox were the very last. The owner through the 60s used to stay at segregated places, segregated hotels during spring training. And Massachusetts only last year recognized Juneteenth as a state holiday, only last year. Texas, of all places, actually has been celebrating it for decades. So just to kind of juxtapose a little bit sort of these realities. And we also come at this at a moment where it seems like history has tipped on its axis a bit, because if you've not noticed, in the last 2 days, the Senate voted 100% unanimously to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And yesterday, the House of Representatives voted with only 14 noes to agree as well. And so now legislation is passing on to President Biden to sign to make this a national holiday. So I got to say, the health center is ahead of the curve. You were celebrating this before the federal people said, yes, we should. And we've been planning this event for a while, well in advance of any vote that anybody took. So props to you and to the health center for it. So to get us started, and Maritza and I, we've talked about this before, but sort of the question that I have that I'm going to ask both Maritza and Masada is sort of how in your own lives you sort of came across Juneteenth, what you know of the early history, and sort of how over time your perspective has changed on thinking about this, and actually also what you both think about sort of this event of the last couple of days. What's up with Congress? So anyway, let's start with you, Maritza.
Yes. So for me, And again, I'll plug the show History on Lowell, because we talked about this on our last episode. For me, it was very much, I was like very young, maybe early teens, when we would go to cookouts in Franklin Field in Boston. And I didn't know why we were doing this or why we were celebrating it. I just knew that it was important to us and that we get to have some food and fun. It was a day of celebration, but I didn't understand the weight and the depth and the significance of it until probably in the last 5 to 7 years of my life, I want to say. For me, the 4th of July has never been a holiday that I really embraced or celebrated, because I knew that we weren't all free on that day. And I also knew that, it just very much like America does, it's another capitalist holiday that we get to buy things. And I'm actually very wary of Juneteenth becoming another capitalist ploy, like how we're in Pride Month and we see rainbows everywhere. What are we going to see next? And I'm a little wary about that. I have tentative excitement about this being a federal holiday. And the reason that I say that is because on the national stage we see, and Bob and I, we talk about this, that there's a lot of push to kind of hide critical race theory and not talk about the very sordid, complex history of America and white supremacy here. And we also know about the discussions of reparations and how they're being halted. So I'm a little tentative and hesitant to really celebrate it on the national stage, but I will absolutely celebrate it in my life. I purchase merchandise from Black-owned businesses. That's how I celebrate, and I take it as a day of rest and joyous celebration. I don't know if we want to have Masada answer that question first, or and then I'll go into the historical significance.
All right.
Take it.
I'll take it away. My knowledge of Juneteenth actually came about 5 years ago. It's very newer for me. And growing up in Lowell, we had 2 major events in the city. For Black American folks, it was around Labor Day, we would have our Black Festival, which later would become a Black outing. And we would have the Black flag raising, which was for Black History Month in February. So it wasn't until we did our celebration with the Kindred Project in 2019, that was our first celebration. And we really wanted to make a point to celebrate with melanated people, given that Lowell has not had a celebration in that way. So it's very new for me, but super important. And with it being a now federally recognized holiday, I'm kind of like, this is a both and situation. It's great that it exists and that other people are recognizing it. And like, what is the holiday without education? I think that what y'all are doing here at the health center is great, to have a conversation, to be able to break down the history, see what it meant to Black people, what it means to Black people, because otherwise, if you're doing this in your organization, you're saying, well, this is a day off. What does that truly mean? So that's something that I worry about. Like, what is this going? Is it going to just be a day off? Is this going to be Patriots Day? We're kind of like, I don't really know who gets memorialized, right? So that's another thing. Like, even when we talk about Memorial Day, who gets memorialized? Why are these stories not told in Lowell? Like, I'm learning much more about Lowell in the history thanks to Bob and Maritza, but we don't learn that in school,
So explain, I think, because it's hard, like I've talked to this with my students and they don't get that the Emancipation Proclamation happens in 1863, but this event in Texas that gets commemorated into June 19th, 1865, it's like 2 years after the fact, right? So what's a little bit about that story that gives the day its significance in terms of why we're fixed on June 19th as opposed to the implementation of the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863?
Yes, I'll talk about it in a romanticized way, because this is how I picture it. We have General Gordon Granger coming in, riding with his federal troops to Galveston, Texas on this day in 1865. And, the federal troops occupy Galveston because Texas was very upset about the Civil War. I don't know if y'all know, but they were very upset because they didn't lose as far as they're concerned. Texas did not lose, but, Robert E. Lee surrenders, and, it takes some time for the rest of the country to catch up we see that still happening today. It's taken some time for the rest of the country to know about Juneteenth. And he announces it either from, in my mind, again, romantic version, you know, some porch in some central place. All enslaved people are now free. And, but it comes with this other side. It's, you know, you're free, but you probably do well to stay where you are, but, you know, work for a wage. And, you know, like, again, in my fantasized version, enslaved folks, formerly enslaved folks, were spreading it word of mouth, and they just started celebrating. And once again, Texas did not like that. And it's unfortunate because we see a lot of the violence that plays out, a lot of the racial violence that has played out over these last 2 centuries, I believe, as a result of this. Texas was not a happy place after after Juneteenth. But that day, that year, June 19th, 1865, did become commemorated as Jubilee Day, and Texans would celebrate it. And in decades and centuries to come, both Black and white alike would celebrate this day. And eventually, with the Great Migration to the north of Black folks, the word spread that Juneteenth was the day that the last enslaved person did find out that they were free. However, the Emancipation Proclamation was not written in our Constitution. It was a wartime effort. And at that time, it didn't actually free all of the slaves, all of the enslaved people. Those 4 states, I always forget which ones they were, but the ones that were bordering the line of the Confederacy.
Virginia, North Carolina,
Delaware,
yep.
And I don't remember this.
I don't know.
And the 4th one. That's a podcast for all of you. Read one of these books. Yeah. Those places that were serving the Union, the enslaved people were not free there. So here we have the 13th Amendment coming in. January, it was passed, and then in December 1865, it was ratified, and it became that slavery would not be a thing except as a punishment for crime. And that's why this shirt says free-ish since 1865. And I think that's important because we still see a lot of the racial ills playing out, and also, you know, peonage. I don't know if you all know peonage, working as a debt slave. Basically, that still was a thing, probably still is in some places. And it's not, maybe not as much Black folks, but definitely low income and immigrant folks, and probably a lot of undocumented folks. So Juneteenth, I think, is very important that we honor this and learn about this history. And, you know, and understanding how it still plays out and how these things still carry into our present. So we have to know about it.
So from the perspective of the health center, you're having this event today. Obviously, we're sitting here, so we know factually there's something happening. What do you hope, when you all were thinking about this internally and you thought, okay, we need to do something, but what do you hope happens going forward with the idea?
That's good. Well, why don't I start with sort of, you know, why it was important to us to make Juneteenth a holiday here at the health center. You know, our job, our mission here at the health center is so much more than the provision of medical care. We often say, what good is it to take care of someone in the exam room and then send them out into the community and into the social conditions that may have contributed to those poor health outcomes. And we know what those are, right? So it's poverty, it's housing instability, it's food insecurity, it's stress, it's isolation, and it's violence. And so we know that racism, both individual and structural, have a direct impact on our community's overall health and well-being and that of each of our community members. We see it every day at the health center. Our care teams see it in the exam room. We see it in the health disparity data. And sadly, we are living it in this pandemic. So that is why this past summer, which seems like yesterday, we joined our local community's movement to declare racism a public health crisis. And for us, we can't do our work alone. We can do our work in the exam room, so to speak, but we must also advocate and activate on those social issues that are contributing to the poor health outcomes in our community, such as systemic racism, which is why we did declare fully and loudly that racism is a public health crisis. Sitting here with our board chair, Bruce Robinson, so grateful to our board. In fewer than 24 hours, we crafted our board resolution and had a unanimous vote from our board. So today is an example of how we activate and how we advocate. So Juneteenth celebrates, as you've just shared, the day that the last group of enslaved people were set free. I never learned about it. I'm sitting listening to these two lovely individuals share how they celebrated growing up and honored the holiday. I never learned about it in my formal education. And that history of Juneteenth, plus the broader history, as well as the lived experience of our Black Americans in this nation, is absolutely critical to understanding racism, the roots of racism, understanding what systemic racism is. Because without that, without understanding that history, there is no way to eradicate racism. So for us, honoring today, it's a step. Declaring racism a public health crisis was a step, but it is an acknowledgement in our commitment to racial justice, and it's a commitment to preserving and protecting and advancing the health and well-being of our community.
And as a Lowellian, I thank you for that. I also had the great experience of being invited to, I'll say, Teen Block again. Give a couple of talks to Teen Block on this history. Back, I think it was maybe in February. I can't remember exactly what month it was, but I know I did, and also for some of the staff.
That's great.
And so I think that that's part of, I'm going to flip back to you, Masada, in terms of you're talking about this needing to be taught, and in Lowell High it not being taught. And frankly, at the university, it's not taught as much as it should be. And I basically went through, however many, I don't want to remember now, how many years of undergraduate and graduate school in history to get a PhD in history, and not ever once did anybody say Juneteenth. In that, so that's really that's about that's like about 9 years of college education, right, where it never ever came up. And so I'm wondering what you think about in terms of Lowell High, in terms of sort of how we take and broaden this out. And just final, and then I'll flip it over to you. UMass Lowell has declared Juneteenth a holiday. So tomorrow they've given everybody the day off as a state holiday, but they're not doing this. There is no event. Right. There is no conversation. There is no there. It's just, right to your point earlier, Maritza, about, well, good. We're done with this now. It's a holiday. We're good. It's like when Martin Luther King Day was declared a holiday. So, okay, now we can just have a 3-day weekend and shop. Stamp of approval. Yeah. So how do we think about how the knowledge that's being gained in the community about Lowell's history that you've both spoken of, how do we get that into more of the sort of K-12 and then obviously into colleges and universities? You have a thought on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that with Lowell, like I born and raised in Lowell native, and every year when I was in elementary school, we would go to the mills, right? To see, we learn about mill girls. Why can't, in that same breath, and we never learned about Lowell cloth and that enslaved people where the cloth was being shipped down. So there's like tons of opportunities to educate folks and build out these curriculums in a different way. We can bring in newer things that are happening, right? We can make things fun. We can sing songs. We can create a hip hop tune so the young people can sing their ABCs. How could we not do it for this? Right? We can make learning accessible, and I think that especially using the Lowell landmarks. I know that there are tons of landmarks throughout the city, and big shout out. And I also want to uplift actually the families that have done the Black American flag raising that I mentioned earlier. That was put on by the Mitchell family, and the Labor Day Black Festival is by the Choate family. I think it's important to say their names because they were doing this work well before I came and did anything with the Kindred project. But I think that, like I said, there's also with the Free Soil Arts, they are visualizing Lowell's Black history. These are all because like we obviously think that learning our history is important, and like we are here. We are a very small percentage of Lowell. Like I think we make up about 8% of the city, but we're here. And so again, like when I say like who do we memorialize, who do we uplift, it has not been Black Americans. So I think that once we determine that that's important, Juneteenth is one step, but once we determine that as a city, this is something that needs to be discussed, folks will be creative. You've done it already. We can sing the ABC so many different ways. It's no longer elemental P, it's LMO. Like, we have broken it down so many different ways. Like, we can do it. I have faith.
I'm not trying. I'm not trying.
Don't try it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think also just to think about the history, when the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Acts get passed in the mid-60s, there's a tremendous amount of violence in the country associated with trying to suppress that vote. A lot of that history is not taught either. And what happens when the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Acts are passed in 1964, in 1965, a lot of who I think are well-meaning white people, same way, well, it's done, job done, right? Meanwhile, a short while later, we have all of the stuff happening in Boston when people try to desegregate the Boston schools. And we have an incredible amount of violence in the city trying to deprive kids of equal education. And so that gets left out, right? We forget that in the history of Lowell, the Lowell public schools get desegregated because the parents of Lowell public school children, whose kids are being denied equal quality education, sue the city. And there's a lawsuit, and the lawsuit goes through the federal courts. It takes a significant amount of time, and eventually the city gives up and changes everything in terms of what's going on. We've also seen in Lowell in the last 4 years a similar lawsuit around voting and voting rights, and it gets to the heart of what the Voting Rights Act was supposed to be. And so again, these things need to be, we need to have these conversations out in the open. That's what was so brilliant about having the rally last summer, declaring Lowell a public health crisis, because I mean, you either were or you weren't for it, and you couldn't pretend that you didn't know that this was occurring, right? So I can't believe we're almost out of time. This is really crazy. We could have done this for 2 hours, but I know you're going to finish us up with Masada with spoken word.
Yes.
And so we will we'll have that now, and then we'll wrap up. If people want to stick around, we have time for some questions. Maybe there's some questions from folks out there in tech world. If anybody has any questions, we'll be sitting here for a few minutes and chatting with people that are here, and I'll probably say team block once more. but anyway, Masada, the floor is yours.
Thank you. There are days when Lent and hope are the only items in our pockets. We sing songs of encouragement to each other. Do not get it anywhere else. Know that our hearts have to be fuller than any space that is meant to rest our hands, comprised of litter and pressure, pearls, stuffed in cycles and circumstance. We walk like overcome is our middle name. Head high, determination in every step. Sometimes moving forward is not about choice, just an understanding that there is no other place for us to go aside from up, and up we go. Even with there being so much against us, so many things not moving, up. The ancestors knew all about this, all about struggle, trying, and repeating. Not everyone is able to recognize their own light. Be a flame. We have to help them wake up. We sing songs of encouragement for them, for those whose light switches don't flick on, for those who have forgotten the power of song. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. We walk like overcome is our middle name. Head high, determination in every step. Sometimes moving forward is not about choice, just an understanding that there is no other place for us to go aside from up, and up we go. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Well, that was powerful. So I think we need to lift up, we need to flip the switch, and we need to light our flames. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you all for being with us. I do wish we had much more time. We did put this within the lunch hours so that our care teams who are busy taking care of our community members would have the chance to join in with us. But for those of you who have some extra time, hang on. We are going to take questions and answers or just continue this discussion. So we would love for you to stay with us. And thank you very much for joining us to not just celebrate Juneteenth, but to honor it and to honor its history and pledge to learn more about our history. We have not, as a society, we have not been learning about our whole history, our comprehensive history. It's been edited, and it's time for us to open it up and learn everything so that we can truly become a just and equitable society and community. So thank you very much for joining us for our wonderful Juneteenth celebration. It warms my heart to see all of you here and our virtual audience out there. So thank you, and stay with us if you can. So the real Masada has left, but her hologram or something is still there.
Virtual.
Her energy definitely.
Her energy is definitely still here.
In the chair.
So are there any questions or comments? I'd love to open this up. You know, one of the questions that we talked about earlier, the few of us, is, you know, where do we want to go from here as a health center? And so many of you here are health center staff. So what does this moment mean to you? And where do you see us going as a health center?
Teacher talk, that you just flipped the room.
I just flipped the room.
That's what we call it, when the teacher asks the room, instead of espousing, the teacher flips the room and asks the class what they want to do.
Yeah.
That's called flipping the room.
Okay.
I like doing that when I don't have anything to say.
Oh.
Not saying
I
that-
always have lots to say.
Yeah, I realized
They know that.
I realized when I said that was the wrong thing to say. As soon as it came out of my mouth, but that's my timing. It's like when I'm stuck, I say, well, what do you all think? And then I stand there and act like I really care. At any rate. I know on the website for this and wherever this will be put in virtual world or whatever, we've created a book list of histories that people can take a look at. And there are several links to kids' books ranging in age from, you know, like 3 years old, 4 years old, up through middle school, high school. We're authors who have been immersed in how to figure out how to talk about these things based on different ages. So I'd say that's the best place, I think, for somebody to go to want to. And there are very specific ones now on how to teach about about the history of Juneteenth for elementary and middle school kids. And they're really quite good. I've looked at a bunch of them. And because a friend of mine owns a bookstore, and so sometimes it's weird when there's a grown man in the kids section sitting there reading kids books. I get looks. But at any rate, I think I don't know what you think in terms of what you would say.
Yeah, I would say just be honest and transparent, and often young people respond well when they know that you're also learning with them. And the more accessible that it is for you, the more accessible will be for them. Kids are smart. Young people are way smarter than they are given credit for. And I've been having these very open and honest conversations with young people for many years now, and I'm still carrying that into just my day-to-day life. So I'd say honesty and transparency and they understand fairness. Young people that very, very little, they might not even have all the words, but they understand fairness. And that is where you can start when you're talking about equity, right? And they understand that people look different from them, but hate is taught. And they need to understand that they don't have to carry that legacy either way, right? Because you're not too young to experience racism, so you're not too young to be taught about it either. So this is all, you gotta, like Bob said, there are resources out there. Teaching Tolerance is a really great website that I use, but it's just about getting down on their level like you would explain anything else.
Are there any other questions from our virtual audience?
Absolutely. Yes. I think any history having to do with race relations, especially in Lowell, because we know when that history is not taught, the people who are our leaders can be very ignorant. I will just say that. And they cannot effectively govern or lead this city that is full of such diversity that they love to praise and celebrate on a surface level, but it definitely needs to be taught. And young people need to see themselves and their history reflected in the classroom, period. So yes.
And the difficult thing with trying to figure out how to get it into school curriculum is there's so much time spent at the highest levels in state education, not just in Massachusetts, but all over the country, where people define curriculum standards and put into those definitions topics that are supposed to be covered. And so the point that Masada made earlier, for example, about most Massachusetts curricula will talk about teaching about the mill girls. They won't talk about the fact that the mill girls, I hate the term, but it is what the history books call it, that young women working in the mills, it's a better way to frame it, also organize themselves to fight the terrible working conditions and their low wages. That gets left out. And it's sort of written as, wow, what a great opportunity for all these young women to go to Lowell and then die in the textile mills because they breathed fibers and got lung damage and went home to New Hampshire and died before they were 40. And so that part of it gets left out. But what also gets left out is the point that Masada was making, that where did the cotton come from? If you're teaching about cotton mills in Lowell and you don't interrogate where did the cotton come from, then you've left out this fundamental part of American history, right? And I mean, so it's as if, right, there's cotton plantations in New Hampshire and Maine, like there's a great growing season for cotton in Maine and New Hampshire, right? Of course the cotton comes from the South. Of course the cotton is imported into Lowell, and that helps perpetuate the institution of slavery. And so there's another opportunity. And thirdly, young women in Lowell who are working in the mills become fundamental backbones to the abolitionist movement that existed in the city of Lowell. They start a female anti-slavery society. They're on the front line of trying to help fugitives, freedom seekers who are escaping coming up out of the South. And so there's like 5 ways right there that you could introduce all of this stuff on any level, on any grade level, and you do it more, you do it to different degrees at different grade levels, but it's not baked into the curriculum. And so it becomes hard to teach. And it just, the other part of this is that it gets left out of textbooks because 2 or 3 states control the textbook market, and Texas being one. Even though Texas celebrates Juneteenth, Texas history books are notorious for leaving out a lot of this history. If anybody wants to read a good book about Texas and race, on Juneteenth, this new book that just came out by Annette Gordon-Reed, Pulitzer Prize winner. It's very short for those of you that don't like long books, but man, there's a lot of stuff in there in about 140 pages. But they control the textbook market. And so the debate we're having now, where people are talking about critical race theory and whatever, it's a subterfuge. It's basically a smokescreen for what they're trying to do, which is to keep this history out. And I really do think that Juneteenth, if we let them, the Congress voting as they did, they again are going to think, oh, good, we're done with that. We can move on. We've solved the race problem in America. Juneteenth is a federal holiday. And breathe a sigh of relief. Obviously, we know that's not the case. And so how this gets into, I mean, that's why I think the value of the Free Soil Collective and Lowell, the Kindred project, the signage that's going up around, if anybody has seen it, in different parts of the city, it's slowly percolating up. And now we have to put the pressure on that it be integrated into the schools. We'll see. I mean, this building was a depository for enslaved people's labor when it was a mill, when it was a cotton mill. You could have a marker acknowledging that somewhere in the building at some point in the future. It would be, again, just as a way to represent, right? Uh-oh, somebody got pointed. Oh, now you're pointing back. But anyway, easier for me to give people work.
No, it's an important point. We have a question in the back. Yeah. So I'm not sure everyone heard the question, but why wait for the city or government or any other body to sort of introduce the history? Why don't we do something here on our own, a history academy of sorts? And I think we have one example of that with the show that Bob and Maritza host. I mean, I watched it once and I went, that's where I'm going to get educated. But I agree with you. I think that is something that as a health center, we should definitely explore. So I think it's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Plug the film.
Oh, yes.
Plug it.
I don't know why we didn't talk about this. We were talking about Lowell's history this whole time. Next Thursday at 7:30 at LTC, Lowell's Telemedia Center, we are actually premiering a documentary called A Contradictory Place. It's about Lowell and its abolition history here. And that's one way that Bob and I, because we're totally partners in history crime, and we are doing so many of those kinds of things to create more accessible learning for everybody. And that is one way. So if you're not able to make it, because I think the tickets are pretty much almost sold out. Which is so exciting. I mean, you can show up because maybe not everybody might come. If you're just free next Thursday night at 7:30, show up and see. If nobody, people don't come.
Or we have people who can sneak us in.
We can put you on the list.
Yes, there's a list. There's a list. Sorry, LTC.
It'll be Woodstock again.
But we could do a showing here.
Yeah,
we should.
If you have a way to show movies in this room or whatever,
We do.
We could do something here. We could come back and
Totally. There's already actually an ask for it because people can't meet next Thursday, and so they're wondering if we're going to show it in different places. So
I think it's a great idea, and I think it's also an opportunity, as we were talking about youth, to bring in our youth from Team Block. I think, yes, I think these are
we could do multiple showings.
wonderful
can
suggestions.
we please bring the youth from Team Block? I miss young people.
Okay. Team Block.
Woo! Yes. How would I imagine Lowell celebrating Juneteenth? I feel like doing these kinds of things. I feel like we're in a year where we're starting to do that. There's going to be a flag raising on Saturday. I know the Free Soil Arts Collective is doing a whole bunch of stuff, and here we are doing this. But I think there needs to be more of that. I would imagine like a block party, honestly, and like pop-up shops, Black-owned businesses that people could support, you know, like a mini folk festival, but Juneteenth festival, where everybody can partake, and then have maybe like learning stations or workshops going on throughout the day where people could learn about the history. Yeah, I haven't thought about this much, but but I would love to do that in Lowell. That sounds that, and if we could do maybe like a week of it, you know, go around to different youth places where we can talk to the young people. I know Bob would do that with me. But I think it would be a lot of fun, and maybe like having it culminate in like a big celebration, a block party, or why not have a parade? Why not have it start at City Hall with the flag raising, and we go make some noise, and then come to, I would want to go probably to Back Central, which was a place where a lot of Black folks were historically in Lowell, or, you know, South Common, and have a party there. Why not? Yeah. Fun, food, and learning. What's better than that?
Okay, so my final comment is for our Lowell Community Health Center family. It's call to action. And we are born out of the social justice movement. We are absolutely committed to social justice, but we are not immune to both individual and structural racism, to the insidious effects of racism. And so what I ask all of you is that together we commit to fostering an organizational culture that is open, it's inclusive, it's learned, and that we proactively root out structural racism so that we can truly become a just organization, an anti-racist organization. And in that way, we can best take care of our patients and our community. So that is our call to action that I share with you. All of you who joined us via Zoom or Facebook Live, thank you for taking time out of your day to honor this holiday. We're thrilled to have had you join us. To our live audience, much love. Thank you very much.